Russia brings war, death, and destruction. So Ukraine protected Moldova, and we understand that. We understand that, had it not been for Ukraine, Moldova wouldn't have existed. The European Union is in large part about that as well, about survival, and becoming a lot more difficult for Russia to attack.
Hello and welcome to the Independence Avenue Media. My name is Maria Ulyanovska. As Ukraine and Moldova begin EU accession talks, I bring to you a conversation with the Moldovan ambassador to the U.S. We discuss the country's existential choice towards EU, away from Russian influence, and how this small country's democratic path is a glimpse of hope in the times of might makes right. After almost 2 years, Ukraine and Moldova are expected to start their first EU negotiations cluster. How big is this milestone for Moldova?
Look, the European Union for the Republic of Moldova is really a matter of economic development, which is really important. It is a matter of having an attractive societal project for the country, which is important because, Moldova has successfully completed its transition from a post-Soviet state to a society which has free elections, which has free media, which values its freedoms, which values its independence, and essentially is, on its way to becoming a modern Western country which is firmly anchored in the West. You know that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, not only did Russia have no attractive development or economic model to offer to former Soviet Union countries, but furthermore, what it did in Ukraine, which is essentially start a fully fledged aggression against Ukraine, I think showed very clearly to all post-Soviet countries what today's Russia is all about. It is an aggressor country. It is a country which is trying to dismember Ukraine. So the European Union for the Republic of Moldova is really about having a model for economic, societal development, but critically, and I think this is really a critical point, not only for the Republic of Moldova, but also for Ukraine, it's about security, because the key business of states is survival. Today's international environment is no longer a rules-based international system. It is more a balance of power system where strong, large states compete for spheres of influence. And survival has really become one of the top priorities for countries like the Republic of Moldova, for countries like Ukraine. And the European Union is in large part about that as well, about survival, and becoming a lot more difficult for Russia to attack. And besides, I also wanted to remind you that, the European Union has, the founding treaties of the European Union have this really interesting article about collective security for its members, which, some people say is just as important and may grow in importance as we progress. So therefore, the European Union is something that would preserve Moldova's statehood, that would help us to preserve ourselves as a country, and yes, definitively leave any semblance of the Russian sphere of influence. And we, of course, see very clearly what Russia is doing in Ukraine today. We see what it is doing in the Donbass, in the occupied territories, and what kind of policy it pursues. And we understand very well that if you get into the Russian sphere of influence, that is what is in store for you. And nobody wants that to happen. So yes, the European Union is a really important goal for the Republic of Moldova. We are progressing very fast on that road. And it is about three things: an economic development project, societal development project, but also about security.
Maia Sandu, in one of the podcasts, while being asked if there were a referendum for Moldova to rejoin with Romania, she said that she would vote yes. Do you see this in the future? Is this really the choice? Is this either uniting with Russia or uniting with Romania? Where is the sovereignty of Moldova in this question?
Moldova's policy is to join the European Union, to become a EU member. This is what Moldova's diverse society has agreed on, and this is the policy that we're pursuing. President Sandu has played a huge role in Moldova's modern history, because she was the president who said very clearly we're no longer going to be playing these geopolitical games. We're no longer going to be trying to balance between Russia, the European Union, the United States of America. No, that is just over. Our policy is EU accession. We want out of Russia's spheres of influence. And she has pursued this policy with a lot of conviction and a lot of determination. And she essentially was the first leader in the Republic of Moldova who has done that. Because in the past, just like in the case of Ukraine before the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Moldova, until Russia's fully fledged aggression against Ukraine, we were sort of, trying to sit on two chairs, right? So we thought that somehow we could be in this gray zone and then we're going to benefit from having good relations with the East and the West. And that was, of course, a mistaken policy from day one. The Baltic states, unlike us, did something different. They said, okay, so we're going to join the European Union, we're going to join NATO, and then from within those organizations, we are going to see what happens next, right? We're going to see whether an experiment of turning Russia into a democracy is going to succeed or not. And of course it didn't, which was quite clear at the very beginning, right? So President Sandu, I think her place in Moldova's history is going to be quite serious, because she has pursued this policy and she never once, digressed from this very serious, I would say, paradigm shift in how Moldova thinks about itself and how Moldova pursues its national interest. And our national interest is to make sure that after this geopolitical redistribution takes place, and this is what is going on, we are now going to probably be moving to a world that is based more on the spheres of influence, that is based more on the balance of powers. It is no longer going to be a uniform world, which, had one single superpower, and it was a rules-based international system, right? So after this geopolitical distribution takes place, under no circumstances is the Republic of Moldova going to end up in the Russian sphere of influence again. We've been there. We don't want to get there. We see very clearly what is going on in Ukraine today. And I think Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and I worked in Ukraine for a year and a half after the war started, so I've seen it all with my own eyes. And I think that really changed perceptions in the Republic of Moldova, that really changed the perception of what it is that Russia is doing. Russia is not bringing you a development project. It is not bringing you an attractive model for your society. Russia brings war, death, and destruction, and that is the truth. And I think that in Moldova, more and more people understand this, and that sort of societal consensus is not likely to change. I don't think that you will ever have a time when Moldova will turn back.
Can you walk us through how did this sentiment towards Russia changed in Moldova since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, knowing that you have Gagauzia, you have Transnistria, you've had the same big problem that Ukrainians had? How did this shift happen?
This shift happened at the level of perceptions. More and more people understand that Russia is a threat. For example, our largest ethnic community after Moldovans, Romanians, is the Ukrainian ethnic community, right? And our Ukrainian ethnic community in Moldova has traditionally been very pro-Russian. It was one of the most pro-Russian communities in the country. These perceptions are changing. People understand that, Russia is not going to bring you better functioning economy. It's not going to give you any development prospects. It is not going to mean anything good for your country. People see that. People see what's happening in Ukraine. So we have war right on our border. Ukraine's first longest border is with Russia, and Ukraine's second longest border is the Republic of Moldova. It's approximately 1,200 kilometers long. It's not Poland. It's not Belarus, it's Moldova. And so therefore we see, feel and hear the consequences of war all the time. And this cannot be classified in any other way than a war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, which was totally unprovoked, which was unnecessary, and Moldovans understand that. And I don't think anybody in Gagauzia or in the Transnistrian region wants to be used by the Russian Federation as a pretext, to spread war from Ukraine to the Republic of Moldova. You got to be completely mad to even think about that or to want that, no matter what your sentiments are. From 2014 until 2022, I don't think many people realized what was going on. So somehow people thought that Russia, from a revisionist state, after they annexed illegally Crimea, that, that is going to be it, and sort of, things will not go any further. That was sort of the general sentiment in my country. After 2022, the full extent and exposure of what the Russian Federation is doing became very clear. More so that, Moldova was also the target of Russian aggression in 2022, and all those ships that were off, the Black Sea coast and the Odessa region. There's a region in Ukraine, Bujak, which was also the target of the invasion. And it's not a big secret that Russia, within the first weeks of its fully fledged invasion and aggression against Ukraine, was planning to go through that region to connect with the Transnistrian region, and then Moldova would have essentially become a satellite state. And no amount of propaganda, no amount of brainwashing is going to change this realization of the basic realities on the ground, and they are what they are. And look, I think if you ask me, from the perspective of our region, it was probably the largest mistake that Russia has made in its entire history, fully fledged aggression against Ukraine. And I think that is, an assessment of a lot of foreign policy analysts, right? I think that, that is where the Russian Empire is going to end, essentially. And that's, thanks to Ukraine's ability to resist, and thanks to the fact that you're a very independent-minded people, and that you don't like others to tell you what to do.
You've had the experience of Russian presence on your territory for over 30 years now. You have a whole generation of people who grew up in that, not knowing the alternative. At the same time, I know Moldova has introduced a new strategy to reintegrate Transnistria. What can you share some of the experience of the vision, how that is possible? What is your vision for your country?
Look, first and foremost, it is our geopolitical luck that we don't have a common border with Russia. That is important, right? Number one. Number two, settlement of the Transnistrian conflict, there's nothing new. It's exclusively through peaceful political means, through negotiations. And number three, the withdrawal of Russian forces is an important prerequisite to those peaceful political negotiations. And that is the only way that Moldova will be handling this situation and settling this conflict, because we want to be a factor of peace and stability in the region. We don't want any escalations. We don't want any other hotspots behind Ukraine's back, and so we're going to behave very, very responsibly. So those are the three principles that we have pursued consistently, and that we're going to continue to pursue.
Moldova and Ukraine are now connected on their path towards EU. By the assessment of the European Union, Moldova is moving, I think, 5 times faster in the reforms process. There was also a question of blockage of the accession talks by Hungary because of Ukraine. How do you feel about being tied to Ukraine in this process? There are also talks about maybe decoupling and putting these countries on the separate track. What is your assessment of both countries going together?
So Ukraine protected Moldova, and we understand that. We understand that, had it not been for Ukraine, and had it not been for the fact that Ukraine resisted and stood firm at a huge cost to the country, Moldova wouldn't have existed, quite simply. And that, I think, is something that Moldova is going to remember for many, many generations to come. We're moving to the European Union together, and I think that's how it is. I understand that there's very good prospects that accession negotiations are going to be opened up quite soon. And by the way, we're also working very, very closely with the United States of America on deterring Russia, and and we have had a fantastic relationship with this administration on a number of fronts, to make sure that, Russia, that the war is stopped in Ukraine on terms that secure a lasting peace, rather than, the Russians taking the war to another country. The United States have been very helpful in deterring Russia from taking this aggression further to other countries.
What kind of cooperation do you have with the current administration? What efforts do you see in helping Moldova not be a direct party to this war, to deter Russia?
In November of last year, we had an election in the Republic of Moldova, and that was probably one of the best examples. where Russia went all in, just as it did in Armenia, trying to change the government in Moldova, trying to install a pro-Russian government that would then become a threat behind Ukraine's back, behind the Odessa and Vinnytsia region, right? And the United States of America, I should tell you, understood very well what is going on. They understood what Russia's goals and policies are, and the United States of America, pretty much from day one of our independence and from our existence as an independent state, has been critical to Moldova's survival. And it has also been very helpful in making sure that those elections were free and fair and that there was no undue interference, which went, in Moldova's case, beyond any reasonable, amount from the Russian Federation. Illegal financing, political parties, propaganda, disinformation, what have you, it was a huge whole operation, just as what we saw in Armenia, right? And so, you've seen what the role that the United States of America has played in Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is also, a huge paradigm change, because the United States of America is genuinely interested in peace in that region, whereas Russia, in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, usually chooses the side of the conflict, as the saying goes. It is not in anybody's interest. It is not in Ukraine's interest. It is not in Romania's interest. It is not in the United States' interest. It is not in EU's interest to allow the Russians to turn Moldova into a linchpin for further operations in the region against everybody, right? Nobody wants that, because that's right, between Romania and Ukraine, that is on the border with the European Union. So yeah, strategically, it would be a really great platform for the Russians to to run that country and to launch operations in all possible directions. And nobody wants that. That's quite clear. That is, a very basic security calculation. So, our relationship is based on the calculation of the national interests. And there are very good reasons why the United States of America should continue its cooperation with Moldova, just the way we did, from day one of our independence.
Within the America First policy, how do you convince the United States that Moldova matters?
First of all, values. I told you about values, family, religion, community are things that are not that different here in the United States of America or in Moldova. But secondly, we of course work with interests a lot, right? So we now, in just 5 years, we reduced our dependence on Russian gas, electricity from 100% to zero. And we're now working very hard to attract U.S. businesses, U.S. investments into the Republic of Moldova, including for potentially Ukraine reconstruction in the future, which might be of interest. There would be a lot of need for electricity, and for supply lines, and Moldova is located ideally for that. So we're bringing in, U.S. businesses, U.S. interests, and we are cooperating with the United States of America on a lot of issues, right? And again, as I told you, people who do foreign policy, and they are professionals, they understand that preventing Moldova from getting into the Russian hands is in everybody's interest. It is in the interest of regional stability, it is in the interest of the United States of America. Nobody wants that war to spread. Everybody wants that war to stop as soon as possible.
In the world that is going more and more into the mood of power of the mighty, small countries such as Moldova, such as Armenia, such as not so small but still on the world scale, Hungary, are making their own democratic decisions, going as far away from the post-Soviet world sphere of influence as possible. Do you believe that are we experiencing this final shift? Everything that hasn't been cut is being cut right now?
I think you're right. I think you're perfectly right. Look, and I don't want to go too far for historical parallels, but you cannot force a people or a country to be part of your sphere of influence if they don't want it, okay? Look at the Soviet times. 1953, uprisings in East Germany. 1956, Hungary, which revolted against the Soviet rule and was brutally repressed. By the way, Hungary. 1969, Czechoslovakia, right, which was part of the Warsaw Pact and part of the Soviet sphere of influence, but didn't want to be part of it because it belonged to a different civilization. It identified itself with a completely different civilizational paradigm. Poland, which was almost invaded by Soviet troops 3 times, right? We can sort of, come up with countless examples, many examples throughout history. And I think you're perfectly right. And I really loved your point about us crossing the threshold, crossing the Rubicon, a point of no return. What Russia has done in this war, and I think this is, historical significance of it, is that it is, for many generations, if not for hundreds of years, it is not going to be attractive as a pole of attraction to post-Soviet countries. What it has done in Ukraine is going to reverberate for centuries, for many centuries. It is just not attractive anymore. What it did in that country, and I think that once the war is over, we will see a lot more than what we have seen so far. That will make every post-Soviet country to want to run away, because you don't want to be part of that. And of course, Ukraine and Moldova are prime examples. And I think that, very few people in Ukraine or in the Republic of Moldova will ever advocate pro-Russian policies again. That is it. We have societal consensus that Russia is a threat to the country, and that you should do everything possible to prevent Moldova getting into the Russian sphere of influence again. And I think we will see similar processes in many other countries. I don't want to call it nationalism, because that word is associated with there's negative connotation to that, but there's this feeling of your own identity and your desire to decide for yourself. And this, I think, what Ukraine is all about. Ukrainians are very independent in their thinking. It is impossible to impose any ideas or things on a Ukrainian who doesn't want that, right? And that is a great thing. And so once your people get to decide what your future should be like, Russia is not going to be able to impose its will anymore. That's what we're really looking at. And I think this process is going to acquire speed, and this is going to go on, and we'll get to its logical conclusion.